Hi, I'm Amy Jo Detweiler with Oregon State University Extension Service. Today I'm going to talk about adding wood bark mulch materials or other mulching materials into your landscape beds. You can see here we have an example of a landscape bed. This has some wood bark mulch material added to it. And one of the advantages to putting down mulching materials on top of the soil where you have your landscape plants, it's going to help with water conservation by keeping moisture in for a longer period of time than if this was fully exposed. And it's also going to help keep the weeds to a minimum. You can see I've got dandelions sneaking up through here. It's going to minimize the number of weeds, and they compete for water and nutrients with your landscape plants. Deciding what type of mulching material to use is always a good question, and it really depends on personal preference. There's different types of material for different locations, or it's really about what you like the looks of. So you can use wood bark mulch materials or wood chips. You can use the bark nuggets. There's river rock in areas. If you have a high wind area, it's better to use something like a river rock or some of these heavier stripped mulch materials that aren't going to blow away as easily. So it really just depends on what colors, what looks you're looking for an aesthetic, and then also finding the right type of mulching material for the right location. If you live in a wildfire prone area, you're going to want to avoid using wood bark mulches up against your home or in the first 20 to 30 feet near your home, because these can actually ignite and contribute to the fire in case of a wildfire. So you can use something like river rock instead for a mulching material. Here you can see is a landscape bed in need of some mulching material on top. There used to be some wood bark mulch material that was applied here many years ago. Just over time it's broken down and blown away. Time to put a new layer back on. When you're applying a new layer, you want to do anywhere from 2 to 5 inches of whatever mulching material you're using. And then sometimes I'll get asked about weed fabrics. It's important to know that with weed fabrics here, you can see there was a weed fabric put down here. This is about 15 years old in the landscape, and you can see it's actually in pretty good shape still. No holes or anything in it. This is a high quality landscape fabric, and it's polywoven. If you get up real close here, you can see this is the edge that was cut to put this in place. You can see it's a polywoven, and that's important because it allows water and air to get through to the root system of the plant. It also is a really strong fabric. You can see if I try to push through this, it's not going to puncture easily. And so these types of fabrics that are high quality, if you choose to use one of them, buy one like this type that's going to be one that's going to last for a long time, so you're not having to replace this type of material in the landscape. You don't necessarily need to use it, but it can be helpful in keeping the weeds to a minimum. When you're applying your mulching material, the ideal amount to apply is going to be anywhere between 2 and 5 inches. Less than 2 inches probably is not going to be enough to do the job that you want it to. And then once you get beyond 5 inches, then you risk cutting off the oxygen supply to the root system. So here's some of this bark dust. Just going to put this around and evenly spread it. You can do it with tools, by hand, whatever works best for you. Some people ask, is it okay to go up to the trunk of a tree or at the base of the plant like this? And you can, just make sure it's a nice, even, consistent layer. You just don't want it to get beyond that 5 inches. And make that consistent throughout the bed, and that should work for you. One of the questions I'll get asked is, can I use my pine needle as a mulching material? Or will the pine needles affect the pH of the soil so much that plants won't grow underneath it? I did some research on the topic, and what I found is that the pine needles take a really long time to break down. And because the breakdown is gradual and slow, there's really not a significant change in the soil pH. Our native soils here, the pH is generally about 7.0 or neutral, and plants prefer a little bit lower than that for most plant material. So it actually might be a little bit of a bonus if there's some additional increase in the acidity of the soil. If you are going to use your pine needles as a mulching material, number one, you want to make sure you're not in a wildfire prone area, because pine needles can contribute to the fuel source, and that would not be a good idea. You want to make sure that if you're going to leave them down, you can leave them down maybe for 1 or 2 seasons, but don't allow them to build up too thick, because then it gets hard for water to get down through the pine needle layer. As you can see, plenty of plant material can grow underneath without any problems. So go ahead and use those pine needles for a year or two if you want to help keep the weeds down and keep the moisture in. And just be aware of your surroundings and whether or not it's a good choice for your particular landscape.